I request Dr. Rahul Rathod, our next speaker, to our second version of Global Virtual Healthcare Summit, conducted by Equity Health Analytics in partner with TAM. Dr. Rahul Rathod is a cluster medical head at Dr. Reddy's Laboratory. Dr. Rahul Rathod is a postgraduate medical professional with MBBS and MD, with an executive MBA degree from Wellingkar Institute, Mumbai. He has more than 16 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, biotech, and clinical practice. His key area of interest are big data analytics, real-world evidence, post-marketing, clinical programs, medical strategic planning, clinical development of medical devices, and clinical publications. He has more than 20 clinical publications in national and international peer-review journals, and he has more than 30 global and national phase 4 observational clinical programs, EMR-based real-world evidence programs. Prior to joining to Dr. Reddy's, he has worked as a senior director for medical affairs at Mitra Biotech, Bangalore. Before that, he was giving an increasing responsibility at Bayer Pharmaceuticals as a head of medical affairs and regional medical lead and global medical affairs lead based out of Beijing, China. He earlier assigned with Zydus and Glenmark. Dr. Rahul, I request you to share the screen and you can you can start your presentation. I request audience to, if can post Q&A questions, so at the end of the session can be answered by Dr. Rahul.
So once again, I would like to thank you, Vishal, for a kind introduction, and also like to thank Equity Health for providing this platform to share my views and experiences in this domain of post-approval evidence generation strategies. Primarily in this second version of Global Virtual Healthcare Summit, and happy to be part of this this version as well. Before I actually start, let me give just a disclaimer that the opinion expressed in this presentation and all the subsequent slide is solely of myself and not necessarily of my company. And surely you can read it on my slide as well. Yeah. There are two objectives with which I wanted to share my views. Number one is how can we work on evidence generation strategies which will complement the clinical development programs. You know, when I started my career early in 2000, I think that time the post-marketing studies were always a post-marketing or post-approval clinical development programs, which is usually run by the medical affairs department. Yeah. However, you know, in last few years, there is a significant change which has happened from just a sequential way of doing a clinical programs, from clinical development to, you know, HEOR to the post-approval studies. Now it is more integrated, means even before the product is marketed, the medical affairs start contributing in a data generation activity, which primarily complement the clinical development program. So I would like to share some of those, you know, some of those views and ideas how this can work. And the second objective is how can as a medical affair professional, we can define the therapy development, complete therapy development strategy around the new product which we are proposing to launch in future, keeping patient outcome at the center. Okay, so that is what these are the two key learning objectives with which I'm going to share my views. So I will take, I have only around 12 slides, which I will try to cover most of the strategic aspects. So I will not go in a lot of operational thing. Mostly what I will be sharing is more of a strategic viewpoints or experiences which I had. And I also picked up some of those learning elements from some of the public domain literature. Yeah. So let me start with very simple, let me start with very simple slide first. What is a strategy? So simple English definition, when you just do a Google search, you will find out medical strategy. A strategy is primarily a plan of action which is designed to achieve a long-term goal or long-term objective or long-term aim, which we look forward to. And each strategy will have a lot of tactical plans, a lot of milestones, to achieve achieve the aim by which we are doing it. Yeah. Maybe few of you who may not know what medical affair is. So medical affair is one of the important pillar in a pharmaceutical industry, where they are primarily responsible to ensure the medical marketing plans of a new product which is launched in the market is there, so that the product is picked up very well. It's been shaped up into the treatment strategy of management of a particular disease for which that product is made available. Again, the medical affair, if you go back to a few decades, medical affair was considered as more of a support function. Means when I say support function, is primarily to help marketeers to understand, what is the science behind this product, or help the sales team to train them how to sell this product, or to provide them support for the evidence generation activity. From that phase, now medical affair is completely transitioning into a new strategic role within the organization. Why? Because with our medical credentials, scientific know-how, and credibility among the stakeholders. So when I say stakeholders, these are primarily the KOLs, the key opinion leaders, the top level doctors within the country or outside the country. We are emerging as a natural owner of scientific knowledge and the data within the organization and across the entire life cycle of the product. And because of this, it offers us a unique opportunity to principally move away from a support function and force a new role as a primary strategic pillar of the organization, now which can go hand in hand alongside with R&D and as well as a market access. Now market access is very important function within the commercial team, who start working even before the product is launched. Means even in a development phase, early development phase, market access primarily works to find out what is the place of that product in the treatment algorithm of any particular disease for which that product is getting development. And we all know R&D primarily work in identifying that product and developing it into the level where it can become usable by the human beings. Again, picking up this from McKinsey, this is a vision statement in which McKinsey has shared one article which talks about medical affairs vision by 2025, and it actually says that medical affair can drive improved patient experience and outcomes. That means as this new healthcare landscape is starting to shape up, the different types of evidence generation which is required today, like starting from a regulatory perspective evidence generation to the increase in stakeholder sophistication for evidence generation. When I say stakeholder sophistication, means when I go with a new product to a physician, they will expect me to compare my product with some other currently available gold standard or a standard of care, or they will expect me to prove that my product has certain benefits. That benefit can be simplistically from maybe the frequency of dose administration to the providing such significant clinical benefit. Clinical benefit can be in terms of safety or efficacy. Yeah. So there is a sophistication in which the stakeholder is now expecting us to provide the evidence for any new product which we launch in the market. And it's also important how we gather, integrate and interpret this data, because I believe that this is going to define the future going forward for any new product or any refurbished product which you're going to launch in the market. So there are multiple elements around it, like there are multiple integrated evidence generation elements like health economics and outcome research. Again, not very relevant in India, but very critical for some of those countries where the products are reimbursed, and followed by that real world evidence. Another significant contributor to the evidence generation strategy, I will just touch base upon in my subsequent slide how they are making sense. And we also look at some of those intervention study like phase 3B, where I may go beyond regulatory required studies and try to develop maybe a comparative studies, or may have some studies which will have more expanded duration studies, like just starting, if I am doing a surrogate marker studies for some of the hard outcome, I may continue doing the phase 4 interventional studies to find out more real life, hard outcome, hard study endpoints, like rate of mortality or rate of myocardial infarction or a stroke, if that particular drug is falling in that particular category. Yeah. And I feel like medical affairs team, through their deep understanding of the science, data capabilities, their dialogues with the external stakeholders, which involve not only KOL but also the routine also the doctors at a ground level who actually doing primary practicing or seeing their patient on day-to-day basis. They are very well positioned to understand how to seek evidence required to support the entire life cycle of the product, which will offer an optimized patient outcome. I think that's where medical affair is going to play a significant role in coming future. I believe this point. And again, touching upon this point, I think medical affairs now can get involved in evidence generation early in the life cycle of the product, as you can see on my slide. And just restating what when I started my talk, I think, see, it was a common earlier years that for pharmaceutical companies to consider evidence generation as the responsibilities of individual departments like clinical development department or medical affairs department or market access department doing HEOR studies. And most of the time, these evidence generation were done in a sequential fashion. That means one after another. For example, you first do clinical development studies done by the clinical development, which are primarily for regulatory purposes. Then HEOR primarily for purposes of showing that there is a cost effectiveness benefit of the newer therapy versus the current standard of care. And then the medical affair coming into the picture to do post marketing clinical programs. This is more like a risk averse strategy which we used to follow in the earlier days. However, we have realized, and I will share some of the experiences from some of my earlier companies which are there in a public domain phase, how this has completely changed, and how this has completely changed over last few years. Yeah. Now it is integrated approach. What do we mean by integrated evidence generation strategy? Means you have a clinical development department which primarily focuses on the regulatory approval piece. Then you have HEOR or market access team who actually parallelly work with finding out what is the market need for that particular product, and parallelly the medical affair who understand deeply the various stakeholders requirement, whether the patient requirement or the KOL requirement or the disease therapy requirement, and accordingly parallelly they work on a strategy which actually talk to each other. And when the product is marketed, you have the complete evidence piece around this molecule, which will help me as a doctor to or a patient to pick up that product because it fits in for my treatment. Yeah. And this integrated approach planning involves maybe the randomized studies, real world evidence approaches from all departments, which offers an innovative operating model, and they can go from anywhere from phase 3 study to phase 3B, phase 4 studies. You have RWV, you have patient reported outcome studies, you have disease registries. There are so many different kinds of studies you can actually think about. And why this is important? Primarily because, see, traditionally when this clinical development study happens, it evaluate the new medicine with a sole purpose to get a regulatory approval. And it does not or may not have the evidence that patient, clinicians, or decision makers like payers requires to make the decision to use that product for the particular disease. That's where this entire integrated medical evidence strategy is coming into the existence now. So what are those most common purposes for which we do these studies? So two element to it. Number one is more specific to the disease area. Second is very more specific to the product itself. So when I say what is that is specific to disease area is primarily, is there any unmet need in a current disease management with the current treatment? Is there any unmet need? So we may do some of those research around this even before the product is getting launched, maybe in early phase 2 study or phase 3 study. That is the time I actually start working on it to identify is there any to understand any natural to understand the natural history of disease, what is happening, what is the burden of illness, what is the incidence prevalence, is there any change happening over a period of time, is there any comorbidities which may having some impact, which may affecting the way I am managing that particular, sorry, uh, which is affecting the way I'm managing, the patient with the existing treatment. Does my product which I'm going to launch in future, does it have any beneficial effect on that? To understand the current clinical practice, again, this is very, very important. Uh, how currently the patients are managed, what are their treatment gaps, is there any unmet need in that pattern of treatment? Just to give an example, like when this entire rivaroxaban, which is launched by the Bayer, I think they did an amazing registry. We started even before the product was launched in 2009, 8, 9. So this was like Garfield Day of registry. You can actually look into the website and find out about more detail about it. It's a very long-standing registry program with an amazing way in which this entire registry program was planned to really understand how the patient with atrial fibrillation as treated with currently available anticoagulant therapy, which was primarily warfarin, which was the most commonly used as a oral anticoagulant therapy that time, and what are the treatment gaps, what are the patient level problems, what are the physician level problems. We are able to understand that. And we know, I think these novel oral anticoagulants like rivaroxaban or dabigatran or and all those therapies, how they are able to, fulfill that treatment gaps. Anywhere between just doing a regular monitoring every month, you have to do a blood testing, which is not required to be done for this. You have to monitor the food when you are using warfarin, because warfarin has a very high level of food to drug interaction versus the novel oral anticoagulant. So there are a lot of ways in which those treatment gaps were identified, and these were able to fulfill with the with the new treatment. Again, also you can also use these programs after launch also to understand how the new treatment is getting utilized, and what are the, is there any outcome predictors. The outcome predictors can be anything from maybe the young age, or a patient with no comorbidity, or patient with blood, if it is an antihypertensive, maybe in certain range of blood pressure, they may be, is there any treatment outcome predictor. This outcome predictor can be positive or negative. What is the population level impact of this new treatment which we are going to introduce? So this can happen before as well as during and after the product is launched as well. We can also look at, and most of the time the data sources for this is coming from a lot of registry data, a lot of payer data, or you can also plan some of those prospective registry program which actually captures the real world clinical practice for that particular disease area. You may also look at a product specific, and most of time these product specific studies are done after the product is approved. It may not happen before the product is approved, but you can consider those in your planning phase even before the product is launched, by understanding the intricacies of that particular product, understanding how the current standard of care is working, and what are the current treatment gaps. Accordingly, you can also decide, do I need to do head studies with the standard of care? Does it really make sense? I need to plan real world, short term, long term safety effectiveness studies, because in clinical program you have a very restricted population in which you are using it, and I may not get a real feel of the product. How, when the product is getting used in the real world, it is completely different than the way it has been studied in the clinical, very restricted or clinical programs. What are the long-term clinical outcome studies, which I need to do, which may be beyond surrogate markers. We may also need to look at outcomes which are related to adherence and persistence to the therapy. please understand, I think when I do a randomized or a control clinical study, the adherence rate is controlled by us, by the clinical trial department, by ensuring regular follow-up with the patient. They're coming to us, we checking whether they're taking the medicine on a regular basis or not, because this also impact the outcome of the program. But that doesn't happen in a real world scenario where physician is prescribing the medicine to the patient. Patient will take at his own wheels and fancy. So based on how good or bad he is feeling and other parameters. So it's important to see the adherence versus outcomes. Yeah. We may also get to check some of the subpopulation which are not studied in the real world study. We can also look at some comparative effectiveness in different platform, or sometimes we also do patient reported outcomes. Again, patient reported outcomes became a fad in early 2010 and early 2000 and late 2000, early 2010. Yeah. So we need to see, does it fit all, and maybe another area which we can operate in a post approval phase is additional any anticipated new indications, which may pop up during the research. And there are so many examples I can quote where the new indications. I will give an example of crizotinib, which was a drug tested for lung cancer patient, and it miserably failed in that in the phase 3 studies. So, however, the scientists went in depth and understood, is there any subgroup where this product is working, just to find out there is a 5% of the lung cancer patient has a very specific genetic, these very specific gene abnormalities in their lung cancer, that is ALK, abnormality. Okay. And what we have observed that crizotinib works very specifically in the lung cancer patient with ALK, which is around 5% of the total lung non-small cell lung cancer population. Now, crizotinib is a standard of care for that particular subgroup of the lung cancer patient. So that is, sometimes it is important also to really see, can we look at some anticipated new indications or additional indication which can support the development of this product further. When we are working on a strategy, let me tell you, there are so many different kinds of strategy design. I try to enumerate few in my couple of slides before. You can look at, interventional clinical program or an observational clinical program. But just remember one thing, that one size does not fit all. Just to give an example, patient reported outcome research. This is, as I said, this is was a very hot topic in last few years. Patient reported outcome studies in psoriasis, which is a skin disease, if you know all well, where you actually see there is a patch, dirty looking patches on the skin because of some abnormalities in some of the skin layer. Yeah. And when I see it as an open eye, it looks so embarrassing. Yeah. It has so much social impact versus a patient reported outcome studies done in hypertension. Now in hypertension, patient doesn't have any symptom, doesn't have any issue. If I'm planning to do patient reported outcome, it's ideal to do it in psoriasis, because there is a patient factor which is significantly contributing to the significantly important, because there are signs and symptoms which he or she can see on his body. He has a lot of social embarrassment. If I am giving a treatment which actually helps him to clear his or her skin, it is going to have an important element. And that's why patient reported outcome studies are more important when you have diseases which is affecting a person in his day-to-day social well-being and other factors, versus in hypertension, where patient doesn't see hypertension, he or she doesn't have any signs and symptoms of hypertension that often, and that's where the patient reported outcome may not work there well. So you need to take a call, what type of studies I need to plan during an post-approval phase. I'll just run through a few slides because I think I'm running away of my time. So I think Garfield registry, I also told you some of the registry programs you can do, but again, registry programs are more relevant for a chronic diseases, may not be relevant for acute diseases, unless you really want to figure out what is the incidence prevalences of those particular type of disease. How to work on the strategies. Timely insights come from multiple sources. I just highlighted few which I have used primarily through some of those RWE data sources. You actually can see what type of data gaps are available. Maybe with deep understanding of learning and interacting with the stakeholders, primarily the physicians, where we do a lot of talking, lot of experts, we do a lot of talkings, and we can actually understand what type of data gaps are existing in that particular treatment. or a therapy area. And many times even the secondary data sources like published literature, conference talks, where you go and talk and see the interaction happening. Sometimes on social media, patient blog, physician blog, where they post all those challenges or issues they're facing with current treatment or a treatment which has been offered to them. When I'm planning strategically, I have to consider all different types of factors. So the factor is time, by what time I need the data to be available, what resources, funds available with me. Do I need to do investigator sponsor study or company sponsor study? Again, this is very important strategic consideration. So these are individual, company specific, requirement that there are certain kind of study will be done only by the company because they're time bound important for me. There are certain type of study will be done by the investigator, maybe categorized into investigator sponsor strategy. And if some investigator approaches us, and if that their design falls into the strategic planning which I have done, then I go and support that particular study, because investigator sponsor studies are always more economical and more credible compared to the company sponsor study. Yeah. So this last two slides, just remember whatever we are doing, there are only two aim or two objectives. Just keep in mind. Always consider that we are doing this to improve the patient outcome. And always remember that when we are doing these studies, we have to answer a specific clinical question from that particular research activities. And my key messages, I'm just reading out this slide for you all. See, post-approval evidence generation strategies should complement clinical development studies. Again, I would rather remove that word now, post-approval. Maybe we can have an integrated evidence generation strategies where we actually can start even before the product is launched. The purpose should be clearly defined. That is, what is a clinical question? We should identify the appropriate study methodology, considering the resources available to us. And again, remember one thing, that one size doesn't fit all. If something is successful for one, that doesn't mean it will be successful for the other type of disease. And ultimate aim is to improve the patient outcome. Yeah. Thank you very much, and I stop my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul, for sharing a wonderful knowledge. And we had one query from our clients. How can you, general practitioner, be a part of integrated evidence strategy to understand and deal the benefits of this new drug?
Yeah. So I think this is very, very important question which has been asked. I tried in my last session last year. I think I tried to share how a practicing physician can contribute to the evidence generation. See, the importance of real world evidence is improving significantly nowadays, because even FDAs from like say US FDA or EMA and other agencies have started listening to us, and they've started listening to the real outcome of the real world evidence data, including how it can significantly reduce the cost and the time of new product development. So as a general practitioner, how can I contribute? There are multiple ways. I think first thing which I would say is maybe join any EMR. Whenever you're practicing, you're doing a practice, keep the good electronic records of your patient's medical entire journey, starting from the clinical history, their lab details if they are available, the treatment history, and regularly when they follow up with you, try to keep on updating on it, because this data is going to build up. In India at present, we do not have those integrated systems like the payer systems and all, which is important. But my single statement answer is do EMR, electronic medical record keeping, for your own patients.
Thank you, Dr. Rahul Rathod, to be a part of our session. Thanks for your time and knowledge sharing to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vishal, and I hope there were some learnings for all of you, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks.